Hello, and welcome to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight, the noise and light of the modern world begin to fade. Allow the day's concerns to soften, to drift away like clouds on a quiet horizon. We are not seeking excitement or drama here. Instead, we are looking for a quiet corner of the past, a place to rest our minds, a world that moved at a different pace. Our journey tonight takes us behind the high stone walls of a medieval monastery. We are stepping into a world governed not by clocks or calendars as we know them, but by the tolling of a bell and the rhythm of ancient prayers. A world of profound silence, deep devotion, and communal life, stark in its simplicity, yet complex in its structure. Imagine the scent of old stone, beeswax, and damp earth. Imagine the quiet shuffle of woven robes on flagged floors, the distant, melodic drone of chanting. This was a life dedicated to a singular purpose, a fortress of faith in a turbulent world. To understand this world, we must first understand its pulse, its constant, recurring heartbeat, a rhythm dictated not by the sun, but by the sacred hours of worship. The rhythm of the bell, a day in the life of a monk. The day for a monk in a Benedictine monastery of, say, the 11th century did not begin. It was, rather, interrupted. Sleep was not a right, but a brief respite, a necessary concession to the weakness of the flesh. The true beginning of the monk's day was prayer, and it began in the blackest part of the night. Imagine yourself a young novice, not yet fully accustomed to this life. You are asleep in the dormitorium, the communal dormitory. It is not a private space. You lie on a simple straw-filled mattress, covered by a single coarse woolen blanket. The air is frigid. You can see your breath plume in the dark. All around you are the soft sounds of sleep from your brothers. Dozens, perhaps over 100 men, lying in neat rows. Then it comes. The sound is not jarring or frantic, but it is insistent. It is the toll of the bell for vigils or matins, the midnight office. It is rung by the sacristan, whose duty it is to watch the stars or the water clock to know the precise time, around 2 o'clock in the morning. At the first sound, there is no lingering. To hesitate is to indulge in the sin of sloth. You swing your legs out of bed, your bare feet meeting the shocking cold of the stone floor. There is no talking. The great silence, which began after prayers the previous evening, is still in effect. In the dim light of a few carefully placed tallow lamps, you and your brothers pull on your habits. The rough wool of the tunic and cowl is familiar, a constant, slightly scratchy reminder of your vows of poverty. You do not wash or change into fresh clothes. You slept in your tunic, ready for this call. Silently, the community forms a line and processes out of the dormitory, through the covered cloister, and into the abbey church. The church is a vast, cavernous space of stone and shadow. It is even colder here than in the dormitory. The only light comes from the altar candles, their small flames dancing and casting long, flickering shadows up the stone pillars and into the vaulted ceiling high above. The air is thick with the mingled scent of cold stone, old wax, and the faint, lingering sweetness of yesterday's incense. You take your place in the choir stalls, the dark carved wood smooth and cool beneath your hands. And then the service begins. It is a long service, perhaps an hour and a half. It consists of chanted psalms, readings from the scriptures and from the church fathers. The sound fills the immense space, not a sound of joy or celebration, but a low, resonant, and constant hum of devotion. For you, the novice, your mind may wander. The Latin words, sung from memory, can become a hypnotic drone. Your body aches with cold and the lack of sleep. It is a struggle, a small internal battle against the simple human desire to be warm and to be asleep. This, too, is part of the discipline, to offer up your weariness as a form of prayer. When Matins concludes, you file back to the dormitory in the same profound silence. You are granted another brief period of sleep, but it is a shallow, interrupted rest, for the next bell is never far away. Before the first hint of gray light touches the horizon, the bell tolls again. This is for lauds, the service of praise at dawn. The community reassembles in the church. As you chant the psalms of lauds, the first true light of day begins to filter through the high stained glass windows, painting muted jewels of color on the cold stone floors. There is a quiet symbolism here, the coming of the light, the victory over darkness, mirroring the themes of resurrection and hope in the prayers. After lauds, the day's practical rhythm begins. The great silence is lifted. The monks proceed to the chapter house for their daily meeting. Here you sit on stone benches that line the walls. The abbot, the spiritual father of the community, presides. A section of the Rule of Saint Benedict is read aloud, a daily reminder of the vows and principles that govern your every action. Then, the practical work for the day is assigned. Who will work in the gardens, tending the vegetables? Who will go to the scriptorium to copy manuscripts? Who will work in the bakehouse, the infirmary, or the guest house? This is also the time for public confession and correction. Monks who have broken a rule, perhaps they spoke when silence was required, or were careless with a tool, are expected to confess their fault before the community. The abbot assigns a penance, which could be a simple recitation of extra prayers or a more humbling task. The goal is not to humiliate, but to maintain the discipline and harmony of the whole community. It is a moment of vulnerability, a stripping away of pride. From the chapter house, the community disperses to its work. This is the embodiment of the Benedictine motto, Ora et labora, pray and work. The work is not merely a chore. It is considered another form of worship, a way to serve God and the community through the labor of one's hands. Imagine the sounds that now fill the monastery grounds, replacing the silence of the night. The steady scratching of a quill on parchment in the scriptorium. the rhythmic clang of a hammer from the blacksmith's forge, the lowing of cattle from the barns, the gentle murmur of conversation as the herbalist instructs a novice in the physic garden. Each task is done with care and deliberation. There is no rush. There is only the steady, unfolding rhythm of the day. Around mid-morning, the bell tolls for the office of terce, and then again at midday for sext. These are shorter services, brief pauses in the day's labor. The monks leave their fields and their workshops, gather in the church for 15 minutes of prayer, and then return to their tasks. The main meal of the day is taken in the early afternoon, after the service of sext. The monks file into the refectory, a long hall with narrow wooden tables. They wash their hands at a large stone basin, the lavabo, before entering. The meal, like everything else, is eaten in complete silence. As you eat your simple portion, perhaps a thick vegetable pottage, a piece of coarse dark bread, and some watered-down ale or wine, one monk stands at a lectern and reads aloud from a sacred text. The food is plain and nourishing, designed to sustain the body without indulging the senses. On many days, meat is forbidden. You eat what you are given gratefully. The focus is not on the food, but on the spiritual nourishment provided by the reading. To focus on the taste of the stew would be to give in to gluttony. Your attention is meant to be on the reader's words. After the meal, there is sometimes a period for rest or quiet reading. Then it is back to work until the bell for none rings in the late afternoon. This is followed by vespers, the evening prayer service, as the sun begins to set. The light in the church is golden and soft now. The candles are lit once more, and their glow feels warmer, more welcoming than it did in the cold of the morning. There is a sense of the day's labor being complete, of offering it up to God. As darkness falls, the final service of the day is held, Compline. It is a short, peaceful service, a final commendation of the soul to God's protection through the night. At the end of Compline, the abbot walks through the church, sprinkling the brothers with holy water. The great silence descends once more. No one is to speak a word until the chapter meeting after lauds the next morning. In silent procession, you return to the cold dormitory. You do not remove your habit. You simply lie down on your straw mattress, pull the woolen blanket over you, and surrender to the brief, precious oblivion of sleep, knowing that in just a few short hours the bell will toll again, and the sacred rhythm will begin once more. This is your life, a constant, repeating cycle of prayer, work, and discipline, measured out by the tolling of a bell. The abbot's vision, Suger, and the theology of light. The life we have just observed, that of the ordinary monk, was one of quiet anonymity, a life intentionally subsumed into the greater whole of the community. Most monks lived and died within those stone walls, their names and individual stories lost to time, like single threads woven into a vast and ancient tapestry. But now and then,
A figure emerges from this collective life whose influence extends far beyond the cloister walls. A mind so sharp, a vision so clear, that it reshapes the very stone and glass of the world around him. Such a man was Suger, the abbot of St. Denis.
To understand Suger, we must first understand his home. The Abbey of St. Denis, just north of Paris, was no ordinary monastery. It was the sacred heart of the French monarchy. For centuries, the kings of France had been buried there, beneath the floor of its ancient church. It housed the relics of St. Denis, the patron saint of France, making it a major pilgrimage site. It was a place of immense political power, spiritual significance, and considerable wealth. Into this world, around the year 1091, came a young boy named Suger. He was given to the abbey as an oblate, a child offered by his parents to be raised and educated by the monks. This was a common practice, a path for a boy from a modest family to receive an education and find a place in the world. As a boy, he would have known the old Basilica of St. Denis intimately. It was a Carolingian structure, built in the heavy, solid style we now call Romanesque. It was dark. Its walls were thick and supported by massive, round arches, leaving little room for windows. It was a fortress of faith, grounded, solid, and dim. Suger, however, was exceptionally bright and, in his own way, deeply ambitious. His ambition was not for personal gain, but for the glory of his abbey, his king, and his God. During his studies at the abbey school, he formed a close, lifelong friendship with a fellow student, a boy who would one day become King Louis VI of France. This connection would prove invaluable. Suger rose through the ranks of the monastery, undertaking diplomatic missions for both the abbey and the crown. He was intelligent, pragmatic, and a masterful administrator. In 1122, he was elected abbot, becoming the master of the most important religious house in the kingdom.
As abbot, Suger looked upon his church with new eyes. He saw it not just as a place of worship, but as a symbol of the kingdom, and he found it wanting. He wrote of his frustrations, complaining that the old church was dilapidated and, most importantly, far too small. On major feast days, he described how crowds of pilgrims would flock to see the relics, creating a dangerous crush of bodies. He wrote that the crowd was so dense that women, squeezed as if in a wine press, would faint and have to be passed over the heads of the men to escape. But his chief complaint was the darkness. He felt the dim, heavy interior was unworthy of the holy relics it contained and the royal majesty it represented. He believed that the church, the house of God, should not be a place of gloom, but a place filled with light. This was more than an aesthetic preference. It was a profound theological conviction. Suger was deeply influenced by the writings of a 5th century mystic known as Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite. These texts spoke of God as the Father of Lights, and described a divine hierarchy in which light was the physical manifestation of the divine essence. The closer one could get to pure, uncreated light, the closer one could get to God. Suger's great vision, then, was to demolish parts of the old, dark basilica and rebuild it in a new way. He wanted to create a space that was not defined by heavy stone, but by light itself. He dreamed of a church whose very walls would seem to dissolve, allowing a new light, a lux nova, to flood the interior, elevating the souls of the worshippers from the material world to the immaterial, divine realm. To achieve this, Sugar and his master masons employed a series of revolutionary architectural innovations. They were not necessarily the inventors of these techniques, but they were the first to combine them into a single, cohesive, and transformative system. First was the pointed arch. Unlike the semicircular Romanesque arch, the pointed arch directed the weight of the roof vaults downwards more efficiently, meaning it could support greater height and pressure.
Second, they used ribbed vaulting. Imagine a skeleton of slender, intersecting stone arches or ribs that formed the framework of the ceiling. These ribs channeled the immense weight of the ceiling onto specific points rather than spreading it across the entire wall.
And because the weight was now concentrated on these points, the third innovation became possible: the flying buttress. These were elegant, external stone supports, like half arches leaning against the building, that propped up the walls from the outside, counteracting the outward thrust from the roof vaults. The result of these three elements working in concert was nothing short of miraculous. The walls were no longer needed for primary support. They became mere curtains, screens that could be opened up. And Sugar filled these openings with the largest, most brilliant stained glass windows the world had ever seen. Imagine stepping into the new choir of St. Denis upon its completion in 1144. You have left the dark, earth-bound world behind. You are standing in a space that feels impossibly tall and light. The heavy stone walls have vanished, replaced by vast tapestries of colored glass. Light, tinted with sapphire blue, ruby red, and emerald green, pours into the space from all directions. It dances on the stone pillars, paints shifting patterns on the floor, and illuminates the gilded relics on the altar. The light itself tells a story. The windows are filled with intricate scenes from the Bible, lives of the saints, and allegories of faith. For the largely illiterate congregation, this was their scripture, written in light and color. Sugar himself wrote that his intention was for the dull mind to rise to truth through that which is material. By contemplating the beauty of the jeweled light and the golden ornaments, the worshipper's mind could be transported upwards, towards the contemplation of the divine. The consecration of the new choir at St. Denis was a major event, attended by the king and the most powerful bishops and abbots of France. They saw what Sugar had created: a new form of sacred architecture, a physical embodiment of a theology of light. They took this vision back to their own dioceses, and within a generation, the great cathedrals of the Gothic age began to rise across Europe: Chartres, Rheims, Amiens, and the great Notre Dame of Paris. And so, the quiet, scholarly monk who began his life as a boy given to the abbey, fundamentally altered the course of Western art and architecture. From within the structured, rhythmic life of the monastery, Abbot Sugar's vision gave birth to a new style that would define an era, a style that reached for the heavens, not with heavy stone, but with soaring vaults and divine colored light, a testament to how a single focused mind, steeped in the quiet contemplation of his faith, could illuminate the world. The Silent Scribes, Mysteries of the Scriptorium. Abbot Suger's grand vision turned stone and glass into a vessel for divine light, a public and awe-inspiring testament to faith. But within the same monastic walls, a different kind of illumination was taking place, one of quiet intensity and profound patience. We move now from the soaring choir of the abbey church to a much humbler, yet arguably more vital chamber, the scriptorium. If the church was the soul of the monastery, the scriptorium was its mind. Here, in this dedicated room for writing, the intellectual heritage of the Western world was kept alive by the steady, diligent hands of silent scribes. Before the invention of the printing press, every single book was a unique, handmade object, and the monastery was its primary factory and library. The work done here was not merely copying. It was an act of preservation against the tide of time, decay, and forgetting. Imagine the scriptorium. It is a long, narrow room, often situated on the sunniest side of the cloister to maximize the use of daylight, as working by candlelight was a fire risk and cast difficult shadows. Large windows, perhaps of clear, untreated glass, allow a cool, even light to fill the space. There is no grand decoration here. The walls are plain stone or plaster. The only furniture consists of rows of simple wooden desks or carrels and high stools. And the most striking feature of the room is its profound, enforced silence. The only sounds are the gentle scratching of quills on parchment, the soft rustle of a turning page, the occasional sigh of a weary scribe. The work began not with a pen, but with an animal. The very surface of the medieval book, the parchment or the finer vellum, was a testament to painstaking labor. A monk would take the skin of a sheep, goat, or calf and soak it for days in a bath of lime water to loosen the hair and fat. Then it was stretched taut on a wooden frame. With a special curved knife, the monk would scrape the skin again and again, removing every last imperfection until it was thin, smooth, and pale. Finally, it was rubbed with pumice powder until it had an almost velvety surface, ready to receive ink. The creation of a single sheet of parchment was a long, physical, and often smelly process. The ink, too, was made in-house. The most common was iron gall ink, made by mixing crushed oak galls, small hard growths found on oak trees, with iron sulfate and a binder like gum arabic. It produced a deep, permanent black that seemed to bite into the page. Colored inks were reserved for illustrations and important headings, the rubrics, so named for the red ink, or minium, used to write them. For the most precious manuscripts, illuminators would use gold leaf that shimmered in the light, or grind down expensive minerals like lapis lazuli to create a vibrant celestial blue. Now, imagine yourself as one of these scribes. You have been assigned this duty by the abbot. You enter the scriptorium in the morning and take your place at your assigned desk. Before you lies your exemplar, the master book you are to copy, and a stack of freshly prepared parchment. Your tools are simple: a goose feather quill, which you must constantly trim and sharpen with a small knife, a pot of ink, a lead point or an awl for ruling faint, invisible guidelines on the page, and a scraper for correcting errors.
The work is intensely demanding. Your eyes strain to read the script of the exemplar and replicate it perfectly. Your fingers cramp around the quill. The cold of the stone building seeps into your bones, as fires were rarely permitted here. You must focus completely, letter by letter, word by word, ensuring you introduce no new errors. A moment's distraction, a wandering thought, could lead to a mistake that takes precious time to scrape away from the surface of the parchment.
This life was not for everyone. It was a form of devotion that required a particular temperament, a deep well of patience. And in the margins of these beautiful, solemn books, the scribes left us small, secret windows into their experience. Forbidden to speak, they sometimes wrote their thoughts where no one was meant to look. These little notes, called marginalia, are a quiet mystery, a human whisper across the centuries. One Irish monk, working late into the night, scribbled in the margin of his text, "It is cold tonight. The parchment is hairy, and the ink is thin. I am not in the mood for this." Another, upon finishing a particularly long book, wrote with evident relief, "The book is finished, for which thanks be to God." Others are simpler. "Oh, my hand," or "Thank God, it will soon be dark." These are not the words of saints in ecstatic prayer, but of real people engaged in difficult, tiring work. They also doodled. In the margins we find incredible drawings. A knight in full armor battling a giant snail, a rabbit playing a pipe, a cat leaving its inky paw print on a page, inspiring its owner to write a short poem about his beloved cat, Pangur Ban. These images and notes break the silence of the scriptorium, revealing the humor, folklore, and frustrations of the medieval mind. But there is another, deeper mystery hidden in these manuscripts. The mystery of the palimpsest. Parchment was so valuable that it was often reused. A scribe might take an old book, one whose text was considered outdated or unimportant, and meticulously wash or scrape the ink from its pages. He would then write a new text over the faint traces of the old one. This created a palimpsest, a page with a ghost text lurking beneath the surface. For centuries, these erased texts were lost. But with modern technology, such as multispectral imaging, we can now read these hidden layers. Scholars have uncovered lost plays by Greek dramatists, forgotten philosophical treatises, and unique scientific works, all hiding beneath the text of a medieval prayer book. The most famous is the Archimedes palimpsest, where several of the great Greek mathematicians' most important works, thought lost forever, were discovered hiding underneath a 13th century liturgical text. It is a quiet form of archaeology, peeling back the layers of ink not with a trowel, but with a ray of light, solving the mystery of what was lost. And so, in the quiet of the scriptorium, through painstaking labor and unwavering focus, these anonymous monks performed a service of incalculable value. They were the silent guardians of knowledge. They not only preserved the sacred texts of their faith,
but they also copied and recopied the works of Virgil, Cicero, Ovid, and Aristotle, ensuring that the light of classical antiquity was not extinguished, but was instead kept as a quiet, flickering flame, ready to be rediscovered in a future age. Their legacy is not in stone, but on the delicate, resilient pages of the books they so carefully created. The vows of a novice are the path to brotherhood.
We have walked through the abbey at its most vibrant hour, guided by the divine ambition of Abbot Suger. We have seen how his theology of light transformed stone and glass into a vessel for the sacred, a space designed to elevate the soul. We have lingered in the quiet intensity of the scriptorium, where silent scribes preserved worlds on parchment, their patient labor a form of prayer in itself. But this grand vision, this intricate machine of faith and knowledge, was not self-sustaining. It was built not just of stone and glass, but of human souls. It was powered by the profound, life-altering choice of individuals to leave one world entirely and enter another. The grand choir could not sing without voices. The scriptorium could not function without hands to hold the quills. The entire edifice of the abbey rested upon a constant influx of new members, men who would willingly submit to its demanding rhythm. So now, let us turn our attention from the institution to the individual, to the very beginning of the journey. Let us witness the process by which a man from the outside world is stripped of his former self and remade into a brother. We will explore the path of the novice, a year of trial and transformation, culminating in the solemn vows that bind a soul to the monastery for life. This is the story of the vow, the path to brotherhood. Imagine, if you will, a young man standing at the abbey gates. He is not yet a monk. He is an aspirant, a postulant. He might be the second or third son of a minor noble, with no land to inherit and few prospects beyond the church or the sword. He might be a peasant's son, unusually literate and filled with a burning, sincere piety that finds no home in the village. Perhaps he is an older man, a widower or a merchant, weary of the world's endless transactions and seeking a final, quiet harbor for his soul.
Their reasons are as varied as their faces. Some are driven by pure faith, some by a desire for security in a violent and unpredictable age. Some are offered up by their families as a living tithe to God, an oblate given to the monastery as a child. Whatever his origin, he stands at the threshold between two realities. Behind him is the world of family, of property, of personal ambition, of noise and striving. Before him is a world of silence, of community, of obedience, and of a different, more profound kind of labor. His initial request to join is met not with open arms, but with deliberate hesitation. The rule of Saint Benedict itself advises that a newcomer should not be granted easy entry. He may be left to wait at the gate for several days, knocking and patiently enduring. This is the first test, a test of humility and perseverance. Is his desire a fleeting whim or a deeply rooted calling? The cold stone of the gatehouse, the indifference of the gatekeeper monk, the long hours of waiting, they all serve to chip away at any pride or impatience he may have brought with him. If he persists, he is finally admitted, not into the main cloister, but to a guest house or a space set apart. Here he will spend a few more months as a postulant, living alongside the monks but not yet one of them. He learns the basic rhythms, the times for prayer, the posture of kneeling, the respectful silence of the refectory. He is observed constantly, his character quietly assessed by the senior monks, and most importantly, by the master of novices. This figure, the novice master, is perhaps the most crucial person in his new life. He is a spiritual father, a teacher, a psychologist, and a stern disciplinarian all in one. He is tasked with the shaping of souls. His role is not to be cruel, but to be exacting. He must test the novice's spirit to its core, to discover if it is truly suited for the rigors of the monastic vocation. After this initial period, if the postulant is deemed suitable, the first major step is taken. In a simple ceremony in the chapter house, his worldly clothes are taken from him. The fine tunic of a nobleman or the rough-spun shirt of a farmer are set aside. His hair is shorn in the monastic tonsure, that distinctive circle of bare scalp surrounded by a fringe of hair, symbolizing Christ's crown of thorns. He is then clothed in the simple, undyed habit of a novice. This is a powerful, symbolic act. He is visibly marked, set apart. He is no longer who he was. He is now a novitius, a new man. He is assigned a small, stark cell. There is no finery here. A hard straw mattress on a wooden board, a rough woolen blanket, perhaps a crucifix on the wall. This is his entire world. The cold of the stone floor seeps through the soles of his sandals. The silence is broken only by the distant chime of the bells, calling him to his duties. And so begins the novitiate proper, a period lasting 1 full year. This year is an immersive education in what it means to be a monk. He must memorize vast portions of the Psalter, the 150 psalms that form the backbone of the divine office. He must learn the complex cycles of the liturgy, the specific antiphons, hymns, and readings for each day of the year. He must learn the subtle language of monastic sign gestures used to communicate essential needs during the periods of grand silence. He works alongside the other monks in the fields or the workshops, his hands, perhaps soft and unaccustomed to labor, growing calloused and strong. This is labora, work, and it is a test of his willingness to embrace humility. He is given the most menial tasks: scrubbing floors, weeding the gardens, cleaning the latrines. An aristocrat's son might find himself serving food to a monk who was once a tenant on his father's land. All sense of worldly status is systematically dismantled. Here, there is only the status of the soul before God. Throughout this year, the novice master is a constant presence. He questions the novice on the meaning of the rule. He watches for signs of lingering pride, of secret attachments to the world left behind. He observes how the novice interacts with his brothers. Is he patient? Is he charitable? Or does he harbor resentments? The novice is made to read the rule of Saint Benedict aloud, over and over again. 3 times during the year, he will read it in its entirety. Each reading is a deeper immersion into the life he is choosing. It is a year of profound internal struggle.
In the deep quiet of his cell, memories of his former life will inevitably surface. The face of a mother, the laughter of a friend, the freedom of riding a horse across an open field. Doubts creep in during the long pre-dawn vigil of matins, when his body aches with cold and lack of sleep. Is this truly God's will? Can he truly surrender his own will, his own desires, for the rest of his days? Many do not make it. Some quietly ask to leave. Their worldly clothes are returned, and they walk back out the gate, the tonsure on their head a strange mark of a life they almost lived. There is no shame in this. It is better to discover one's true path, even if it leads away from the cloister. But for the one who perseveres, the end of the year marks the point of ultimate decision. He has been tested, he has been taught, and he has been observed. Now he must choose. He is brought before the abbot and the assembled community in the chapter house. The air is thick with solemnity. The question is put to him, simple and direct. Does he promise stability, conversion of his life, and obedience according to the rule of Saint Benedict? This is the moment. There is no turning back from this. To make this vow is to die to the world and be reborn in Christ and the community. If he answers yes, the ceremony of profession begins. It is the spiritual equivalent of both a wedding and a funeral. He writes his vow out with his own hand on a piece of parchment. If he is illiterate, he makes his mark. This document is his sacred contract. He approaches the altar, and in a clear voice, for all his brothers to hear, he recites the ancient formula, promising 3 things: poverty, chastity, and obedience. Let us linger for a moment on the weight of these vows. First, paupertas, poverty. This is more than simply not having money. It is a radical detachment from the very concept of personal ownership. The monk owns nothing. Not the habit on his back, not the sandals on his feet, not the knife he eats with. Everything is held in common. By renouncing property, he is freed from the anxieties of possession, the envy of wanting more, and the pride of having much. He is deliberately making himself as poor as Christ was, dependent entirely on God and his community. Second, castitas, chastity. This is the vow to forsake marriage and all carnal relations. But its meaning runs deeper. It is a vow to reorient the fundamental human drive for love and intimacy away from a single person and towards the divine. All of that energy, that passion, that desire for connection is to be channeled into love for God and a selfless, fraternal love for his brothers. It is a profound sacrifice, renouncing the family he might have had for the spiritual family he now joins. And third, obedientia, obedience. For many, this was the hardest vow of all. It is the complete surrender of one's own will. The monk vows to obey his abbot in all things, seeing the abbot not as a mere man, but as the representative of Christ within the monastery. If the abbot tells him to dig a ditch, he digs. If the abbot tells him to spend the next 30 years copying a single book, he copies. This vow is the ultimate act of humility, the crushing of the ego.
It is a belief that by relinquishing the burden of his own choices, he will find a greater freedom in submitting to the will of God, as expressed through his superior. After reciting these vows, he places the parchment upon the altar. As he does so, he and the entire community chant a psalm, often Psalm 119. "Uphold me, Lord, according to your promise, and I shall live. And let me not be confounded in my expectation." He is then prostrate on the floor, his arms outstretched in the shape of a cross, while the community prays over him. A funeral pall may even be laid over him, symbolizing his death to his old self. When he rises, he is no longer a novice. He is a monk. He is a full brother. He is welcomed by the abbot with the kiss of peace, a formal liturgical kiss on the cheek. He then proceeds down the line of the choir, and every single monk, from the oldest to the youngest, embraces him in turn. He has been accepted. He belongs. He has exchanged the family of his birth for this new eternal family, bound not by blood, but by a shared vow and a shared purpose. His name may be changed, marking his new identity. John the farmer's son might become Brother Ambrose. William the nobleman might become Brother Thomas. The document of his vow is carefully filed away in the abbey's archives, a permanent record of his soul's commitment. From this day forward, his life is set. The rhythm of the bells, which a year ago was a foreign and demanding schedule, is now the very rhythm of his being. The faces of the men around him, once strangers, are now his brothers. The work in the fields, the long hours of prayer in the cold choir, the silent meals in the refectory, this is no longer a test. This is his life. The path of the novice has ended, and the lifelong journey of the monk has truly begun. Ora et labora, the dignity of work. The solemn vows have been made. The novice, now a monk, has died to his former life and been reborn into the brotherhood. He has been embraced by his new family, his soul bound to the abbey until death. But a vow is not a destination. It is the starting point of a lifelong path. And that path is paved with two fundamental interwoven practices, a rhythm so essential to monastic life that it became its enduring motto. Ora et labora, pray and work. We have spent much time within the realm of ora, of prayer. We have followed the tolling of the bells through the 8 services of the divine office, from the cold pre-dawn vigil of matins to the final quietude of Compline. But to understand the soul of the monastery, we must now turn to its other half, to the calloused hands, the aching backs, and the profound, sanctified dignity of labora. In the world beyond the abbey walls, work was often a mark of station. For the vast majority, the peasantry, it was a life of relentless, back-breaking toil, a struggle for survival dictated by the seasons and the demands of a lord. For the nobility, manual labor was something to be avoided, a sign of low birth, an activity delegated to others. But within the cloister, these worldly distinctions were rendered meaningless. The rule of Saint Benedict presented a radical, countercultural idea.
That work, honest physical or mental exertion, was not a curse or a mark of class, but a holy and necessary activity for every soul, regardless of origin. Saint Benedict wrote, "Idleness is the enemy of the soul." And so the monks were to be occupied at all times, either in prayer or in worthy labor. Imagine the day beginning after the early morning services. As the sun climbs higher, casting long shadows across the cloister garth, the community disperses. The great silence of the choir gives way to the low hum of purposeful activity. The abbey, which we have pictured as a place of quiet contemplation, now reveals itself to be a bustling, self-sufficient town, a hive of sanctified industry. Let us follow a group of monks as they walk towards the abbey's fields. Among them is Brother Ambrose, who just last year was the son of a wealthy merchant, his hand soft and accustomed only to counting coins. Beside him walks Brother Martin, who grew up tilling these very fields when they belonged to a local baron, his hands already tough as old leather. Here their pasts do not matter. They are simply brothers, assigned to the same task. They carry hoes and spades, their simple woolen habits hitched up to keep the hems from the dirt. The air in the fields smells of damp earth and growing things. There is a sense of immense peace in the rhythmic work. The scrape and chop of a hoe turning the soil. The grunt of effort as a stubborn rock is pried from the ground. The collective movement of a dozen men working a row of beans or barley. This is not the frantic, anxious labor of the outside world. It is measured, deliberate, and framed by prayer. The work itself becomes a meditation. The focus required to weed a patch of herbs or till a straight furrow quiets the restless mind. The physical exertion tires the body, guarding it against sloth and temptation, making the rest of an evening prayer service all the more welcome. They are working to feed themselves. The goal is self-sufficiency. The monastery is an island designed to have as little need as possible for the corrupting influences of the outside world. They grow wheat for their bread, barley for their ale, sturdy root vegetables to fill the stores for the long winter. In a special walled garden near the infirmary, another monk, the herbalist, tends to his precious plants. Here, the work is more delicate. He gently cultivates lavender, rosemary, chamomile, and comfrey. The air is thick with their scent. This is not just a garden, it is a living pharmacy. The leaves he gathers will be dried to make soothing teas, the roots ground into poultices, the flowers distilled into tinctures. His labor is a direct act of care for his ailing brothers and for the sick travelers who may come to their door. Let us leave the fields and walk towards the workshops, a series of low stone buildings that hum with a different kind of energy. As we approach the bakehouse, the air grows warm and smells richly of yeast and wood smoke. Inside, two monks, their sleeves rolled up to reveal flour-dusted arms, are rhythmically kneading dough on a massive wooden table. The slap and push of their hands against the dough is a steady, constant beat. It is powerful, physical work, yet it is performed with the same focused intent as a prayer. They are not merely making bread, they are preparing the substance of the community's life, the daily bread that is a distant echo of the Eucharist itself. Next door is the brewery. The smell here is sweeter, malty, and warm. A brewmaster monk, a man of great skill and responsibility,
supervises the bubbling mash in a huge copper vat. Ale was not a luxury. It was a staple of the medieval diet, often safer to drink than water. The quality of the abbey's ale was a point of pride, and the surplus could be sold or offered to important guests. This, too, was labora, the careful measuring of grain, the monitoring of temperatures, the patient waiting for fermentation. It was a science and an art, a service to the community.
From another building comes a sharper, more percussive sound. This is the smithy. Here, a strong monk with a leather apron works the bellows, sending a shower of sparks up towards the smoky rafters. He pulls a glowing piece of iron from the forge and lays it on the anvil. The sharp, ringing clang of his hammer striking the metal is a sound of creation and repair. He is not forging a sword for war, but a new coulter for a plow, a hinge for a gate, or nails for a new roof. His work holds the physical structure of the abbey together.
And in a quieter workshop, a cobbler sits on a low stool, the smell of tanned leather and wax filling the small space. He patiently stitches a new sole onto a sandal. Another monk nearby mends a tear in a woolen habit. This work is less strenuous, but requires immense patience. Every stitch is a small act of stewardship, of making do, of honoring the vow of poverty by preserving what the community already has.
Even the intellectual work we witnessed in the scriptorium was considered labora. The careful copying of a text, the grinding of pigments for illumination, the cataloging of books in the library. This was the labor of the mind, just as vital as the labor of the hands. It ensured the preservation of knowledge and the glorification of God through beauty and learning.
Ora et labora. The two are in constant dialogue. The day is structured so that one flows seamlessly into the other. A monk might spend 2 hours in the fields, his mind focused on the earth. Then the bell for sext, midday prayer, would toll. He would lay down his hoe, wipe the sweat from his brow, wash his hands, and proceed to the church. There he would join his brothers, his voice chanting the psalms. His physical weariness would ground his prayer, making it more real, more earned. Then, after the service and a simple meal, he might return to his work. The prayer sanctified the labor, and the labor gave weight and substance to the prayer.
This system was the great equalizer. The former nobleman, sweating under the sun, learned humility. The former peasant, entrusted with illuminating a sacred manuscript, discovered a dignity he had never known. Work was not about profit or status. It was about shaping the soul, serving the community, and keeping the great spiritual engine of the monastery running. It was a physical expression of a spiritual vow, a daily testament to the belief that every act, no matter how humble, could be an offering to God. The neatly tilled field, the sturdy loaf of bread, the mended sandal, they were all, in their own way, prayers made manifest. Food for the soul is a quiet refectory and a monastic diet.
The bell tolls once more. Its resonant voice carries across the abbey grounds, over the newly tilled fields, and into the quiet workshops. This time, it does not call for prayer in the church, nor does it signal the end of a work period. It calls the community to a different, but no less sacred ritual. The monks lay down their tools, the hoe, the hammer, the quill, and turn their steps toward the refectory. The period of labora, of work, is complete for now. It is time to nourish the body that performs the work, but in a manner that continues to nourish the soul.
Let us follow them. We move from the open air or the dusty workshops into the cool, shaded walkway of the cloister. Before entering the refectory, the monks gather at the lavabo or lavatorium. This is often a beautiful covered fountain or a long stone basin set into the cloister wall. Here, in silence, they wash their hands. The water is cool against skin still warm from labor. This act is practical, of course, washing away the dirt of the fields or the grime of the smithy. But it is also deeply symbolic. It is a ritual purification, a cleansing of the self before partaking in the community's meal, echoing the priest's washing of his hands before the Eucharist. Clean hands, quiet hearts. The monks now file into the refectory. Imagine a long, high-ceilinged hall, similar in proportion to the church itself. It is austere and clean. Great wooden beams, darkened with age, span the ceiling above. Long, narrow trestle tables of heavy oak run the length of the room, flanked by simple backless benches. There are no ornate decorations, no tapestries celebrating worldly battles. The beauty here is one of order, simplicity, and shared purpose. The monks take their places in strict order of seniority, the abbot and his prior at a raised table at one end, the newest members furthest away. A profound silence settles over the hall. It is not an empty or awkward silence. It is a deliberate, shared quietude, a vessel for contemplation. For in a monastery, a meal is not a time for socializing or idle chatter, which the rule warns against as a source of sin and distraction. A meal is a continuation of worship. As the monks stand silently by their places, one of their number does not take a seat at the tables. He moves instead to a small raised pulpit or ambo built into the side wall of the refectory. This is the lector, the reader for the week. His role is vital. He will provide the food for the soul, while the others receive the food for the body. The abbot gives a signal. Grace is chanted, the ancient words of thanks rising and falling in the quiet hall. Then, with a rustle of wool robes, the monks sit. The meal begins. The only sounds are the soft scrape of a ladle in the serving pot, the clink of a pitcher against a cup, the hollow sound of wooden spoons on wooden bowls, and above it all, the clear, steady voice of the lector. He does not read news or entertainment. He reads from the Holy Scriptures, from the lives of the saints, or from the instructional works of the early church fathers. The words fill the whole, speaking of sacrifice, of faith, of theological mysteries. The monks eat with their heads bowed slackly, their attention divided between the simple food before them and the sacred text filling their ears. The act of eating is thus elevated from a mere biological necessity to a meditative practice. And what of the food itself? Let us look at the bowls and platters being passed down the long tables. The monastic diet is a study in humility, moderation, and self-sufficiency.
It is governed by the rule of Saint Benedict, which sought a careful balance, enough food to sustain a life of vigorous work and prayer, but not so much as to lead to the sin of gluttony or sluggishness. The centerpiece of most meals is a thick, steaming pottage. This is a hearty, nourishing stew, the bedrock of their diet. It is made from the very things we saw them cultivating in the fields: lentils, beans, and peas, thickened with oats or barley. It is colored and flavored with vegetables from the garden: onions, leeks, and perhaps cabbage or turnips, depending on the season. The scent is simple, earthy, and wholesome. There is bread, of course, not light, white bread of the aristocracy, but dense, dark loaves made from wheat and rye, with a thick, satisfying crust. Each monk is allotted a generous portion, for bread is the staff of life, a constant, humble reminder of the body of Christ. This is the very bread we saw being kneaded in the bakehouse, the product of their brothers' labor. A crucial element of the Benedictine rule was the prohibition on the meat of four-legged animals. The flesh of cattle, sheep, and pigs was forbidden to all but the weak and the sick. This was a radical departure from the diet of the surrounding world, where meat was a symbol of wealth and power. For the monk, abstaining from meat was an act of penance, a way to subdue the passions and practice detachment from worldly indulgence. Their protein came from other sources. On certain days there might be fish, perhaps a pike or a carp, raised in the abbey's own carefully managed fish ponds. There would also be eggs from their hens, and cheese made from the milk of their cows or goats. These were seen as simpler, more humble foods. To drink there is water, and often a measure of ale or wine. The abbey's own brewery and vineyard provided this. Like the food, the drink was for sustenance, not revelry. It was a gift from God, a product of the earth and their own labor, to be consumed with thankfulness and moderation. Imagine the scene. 100 men eating in near complete silence. The only communication is through a series of simple, practical hand gestures agreed upon beforehand. A sign for more bread, a sign for water. The lack of conversation focuses the mind inward, allowing the lector's words to take root. The monk chews his simple food slowly, contemplating its origin in the abbey's own soil, its preparation by his brother's hands, and the spiritual nourishment he is receiving from the reading. The meal is a perfect microcosm of the monastic ideal: community, humility, shared labor, and a constant orientation toward the divine. When the meal is over, grace is said once more. The monks rise in unison and file out of the refectory as silently as they entered, leaving the remnants of the meal on the tables. A designated team of monks, the weekly servitors, will now enter to clear the tables, wash the dishes, and sweep the floor. This duty rotated through the entire community, from the youngest to the oldest. Even the prior or the cellarer might be seen scrubbing pots. It was another lesson in humility, a reminder that all service, no matter how menial, is honorable in the eyes of God. The monks depart, their bodies sustained and their souls fed. The quiet refectory, now empty, holds the echo of the reader's voice,
a testament to a meal that was not an interruption of the sacred day, but an integral part of it. The art of lighting is gold, pigment, and patience. We have seen the monk at prayer and at work. We have followed him into the fields and the workshops, and shared in his silent, meditative meal. We have come to understand his life as one ordered by the twin pillars of ora et labora. Now, let us return to that quiet, focused heart of the abbey's intellectual life, the scriptorium. We have witnessed the scribes at their silent labor, but we have yet to explore the most dazzling and precious aspect of their work. Let us now look beyond the simple black ink of the text and delve into the world of illumination. This is the art of lighting up a manuscript, of transforming a functional book into a transcendent work of art, a treasure worthy of God Himself. It is a process that combines immense artistic skill, profound patience, and the rarest and most expensive materials available to the medieval world. Here, in the quietest corners of the scriptorium, we find the illuminator, a monk whose labor is not in the fields, but in a universe of color and light contained on a page of vellum. Imagine an illuminator sitting at his slanted desk. The light from a high window falls across the surface of a large open book. The main text has already been copied by a scribe, the neat columns of black lettering leaving deliberate empty spaces, a large initial at the beginning of a chapter, a border around the page, or a square reserved for a miniature scene from the life of Christ or a saint. These empty spaces are his canvas.
We have seen the monk at prayer and at work. We have followed him into the fields and the workshops and shared in his silent, meditative meal. We have come to understand his life as one ordered by the twin pillars of ora et labora. Now, let us return to that quiet, focused heart of the abbey's intellectual life, the scriptorium. We have witnessed the scribes at their silent labor, but we have yet to explore the most dazzling and precious aspect of their work. Let us now look beyond the simple black ink of the text and delve into the world of illumination.
This is the art of lighting up a manuscript, of transforming a functional book into a transcendent work of art, a treasure worthy of God Himself. It is a process that combines immense artistic skill, profound patience, and the rarest and most expensive materials available to the medieval world. Here, in the quietest corners of the scriptorium, we find the illuminator, a monk whose labor is not in the fields, but in a universe of color and light contained on a page of vellum.
Imagine an illuminator sitting at his slanted desk. The light from a high window falls across the surface of a large open book. The main text has already been copied by a scribe, the neat columns of black lettering leaving deliberate empty spaces, a large initial at the beginning of a chapter, a border around the page, or a square reserved for a miniature scene from the life of Christ or a saint. These empty spaces are his canvas. His work does not begin with a flourish of the brush. It begins with a thought, a prayer, and a sketch. With a stylus of soft lead or a piece of silver point, he will lightly, almost invisibly, draw his design onto the vellum. This requires immense foresight and precision. He is not just decorating, he is interpreting the text. An illumination for the book of Genesis might depict the 7 days of creation in a series of intricate panels. A psalter might have the initial B of Beatus Vir, blessed is the man, transformed into a sprawling vine-like creation, within which King David himself is shown playing his harp. The design must be both beautiful and theologically sound, enhancing the meaning of the words, not distracting from it.
Once the design is sketched, the most painstaking work begins. The first and most sacred step is the application of gold. Gold was not just a color, it was the embodiment of divine light, of heaven itself. To use it on a page was to give the reader a glimpse of the eternal. There were 2 main methods. For a flat, burnished gold, the illuminator would apply a thin, sticky layer of gesso, a plaster-like substance made from gypsum and animal glue, to the areas he wished to gild. He would build it up carefully, creating a slightly raised surface. After letting it dry, he would breathe on it, the moisture from his breath making the gesso tacky for a fleeting moment. Then, with the utmost delicacy, he would lift a gossamer thin sheet of gold leaf with a special tool and lay it over the gesso. The leaf is so fragile that a sudden draft could tear it to pieces.
Once applied, he would burnish it. Using a smooth, hard tool, often a polished stone like agate or even a wolf's tooth, he would rub the gold leaf with steady, patient pressure. As he worked, the dull sheen of the leaf would transform into a brilliant, mirror-like surface. The gold now catches the light, glowing with an inner fire, seeming to emanate light rather than merely reflect it. This was Abbot Sugar's theology of light, not in stone and glass, but on the page itself.
Now, the color. The pigments used by the illuminator were a testament to the abbey's wealth and its connections to the wider world. These were not simple paints. Each was a precious substance, painstakingly prepared.
Imagine the pigments laid out before him in small shells or pots. There is ultramarine blue, the most prized of all. It is made from lapis lazuli, a semi-precious stone mined only in the distant mountains of what is now Afghanistan. The stone had to be transported thousands of miles via treacherous trade routes, making the pigment more valuable than gold itself. It was ground into a powder, purified through a complex process involving wax and lye, and then mixed with a binder, usually egg tempera, to create a blue of unparalleled depth and vibrancy. This blue was reserved for the most sacred subjects, the robe of the Virgin Mary, the very sky of heaven.
There is vermilion, a brilliant, fiery red made from the mineral cinnabar, a toxic mercury sulfide. There is green from malachite, or a simpler green from buckthorn berries. Yellows could be derived from saffron, a painstaking and expensive process, or from the toxic mineral orpiment. White was made from lead, black from the soot of candles or lamps carefully collected. Each color had to be ground by hand with a stone muller on a slab of porphyry or glass. It was a slow, repetitive, meditative task. The monk would grind the pigment, mix it with egg yolk and a little water or glaire, a binder made from egg whites, testing the consistency until it was perfect. The process was part of the art, a physical commitment to the creation of beauty.
With his colors prepared, he begins to paint, applying the pigment with fine brushes made from squirrel or ermine fur set into feather quills. He works in layers, building up the color slowly. He paints the robes of a saint, the wings of an angel, the leaves of an impossibly intricate vine that snakes its way up the margin of the page. The work is microscopic. He might paint the tiny folds of a robe, the individual hairs of a beard, the glint of light in a character's eye. It requires a hand that is perfectly steady, an eye that is sharp, and a patience that is almost beyond comprehension. He cannot afford a single mistake. A slip of the brush could ruin weeks of work.
He works in silence, his breathing slow and steady. The world outside the scriptorium window, the changing seasons, the passing of hours fades away. His entire universe is the page before him. His labor is a form of deep contemplation. As he paints the life of a saint, he meditates on that saint's virtues. As he illuminates a psalm, the words of the psalm echo in his heart. It is a slow, methodical prayer, an offering of time, skill, and precious materials to the glory of God. A single, highly decorated page could take weeks to complete. A major Bible or Psalter could be the life's work of a team of monks. It was an enormous investment of the abbey's resources, a testament to their belief that no expense was too great, no effort too painstaking when it came to creating the Word of God in physical form. These books were not just for reading. They were sacred objects, relics in their own right, kept in the church treasury and brought out only on the most important feast days, their golden pages shimmering in the candlelight, a true treasure for the house of the Lord.
The Abbey Library is a treasure trove of knowledge.
We have just witnessed the birth of a single, illuminated manuscript, a process of immense patience, devotion, and artistry. We saw how gold and precious pigments could transform a book into a sacred relic. But such a treasure was not created to exist in isolation. It was destined to join its silent brethren in a place that served as the Abbey's memory, its intellect, and its soul. This was the library. Let us leave the illuminator to his patient work and move to this quiet, hallowed space. In an age before printing, when a single book could take a year or more to create and cost as much as a small farm, the library of a great abbey was one of the most valuable and vital places in the entire medieval world. It was not merely a storage room for books. It was a fortress against the forgetting of things, a beacon of knowledge in what was often a dark and tumultuous sea of ignorance. The library itself might not be a grand, separate building as we might imagine it today. In earlier periods, the books were often kept in large, locked wooden chests, or armaria, stored in a recess off the main cloister, usually on the sunniest, driest side, to protect the precious vellum from damp and decay. The monk in charge of these chests was the armarius, a position of immense trust and responsibility. He was the guardian of the community's collective knowledge. As we approach this space, the air feels different. There's a unique scent here, a dry, sweet, and slightly dusty smell of aging parchment, leather bindings, and beeswax polish. It is the quietest place in the entire monastery, quieter even than the church between services. This is a silence not just of voice, but of time itself. To open a book here is to open a direct conversation with a mind from centuries past.
The armarius, or librarian, unlocks one of the heavy chests. Inside, the books are not standing upright on shelves as we are used to. They are lying flat, one on top of the other, or perhaps stored horizontally, with their titles written on the foredge of the pages. Each is a weighty, substantial object. The bindings are thick wood, covered in leather, often with heavy metal clasps to keep the vellum pages pressed flat and protected from humidity. To lift one is to feel the physical weight of knowledge.
The librarian's first duty is preservation. He is in a constant battle against the enemies of the book, dampness, which causes the vellum to buckle and the ink to fade, mice and bookworms, which can chew through centuries of learning in a single season, and theft, for these books are treasures of immense value. He regularly airs the manuscripts, carefully turning the pages. He checks the bindings for any sign of decay and might perform minor repairs with his own hands. He keeps a meticulous catalogue, a list of every single volume the abbey possesses. This list is a map of their intellectual world. Let's look at what kinds of books fill these chests. The collection is, first and foremost, a reflection of the monastery's spiritual purpose. There are multiple copies of the Bible, the undisputed Word of God. Some are simple, unadorned copies for study, their margins filled with notes and commentaries or glosses from generations of monks. Others are the magnificent illuminated Bibles we have seen being created, reserved for liturgical use on the altar. Then come the works of the Church Fathers, the profound theology of St. Augustine, the sermons of St. Gregory the Great, the letters of St. Jerome. These are the pillars of Christian thought, the essential guides for understanding Scripture and living a holy life. Alongside them are the lives of the saints, or hagiographies. These were the spiritual adventure stories of the Middle Ages, providing heroic models of faith, suffering, and divine reward for the monks to emulate.
But the library is not limited to purely theological works. The Benedictine tradition, with its emphasis on understanding God's creation, encouraged a broader range of learning. Here, we might find copies of the classical authors of ancient Rome, saved from oblivion by the patient work of monastic scribes. There is Virgil's epic poem, the Aeneid, the speeches of Cicero, the histories of Livy. These pagan texts were read with a certain caution, their worldly wisdom filtered through a Christian lens, but they were valued for their masterful use of the Latin language and for the historical knowledge they contained. We might also find books on what we would now call science. There are herbals detailing the medicinal properties of plants, essential for the work of the infirmarian. There are bestiaries, fantastical collections describing animals both real and imagined, each imbued with a Christian moral or allegorical meaning. A description of a lion who breathes life into his stillborn cubs becomes an allegory for Christ's resurrection.
There are books on astronomy, or more accurately, astrology, which was crucial for calculating the dates of Easter and other movable feasts. There may even be a copy of Euclid's Elements, preserving the fundamentals of geometry. The library is therefore both a storehouse and a workshop. Monks would come here, with the permission of the armarius, to borrow a book. Reading was not a casual leisure activity. It was a form of study, of deep, meditative engagement with a text known as lectio divina, or divine reading. A monk would take a book back to his place in the cloister or his cell. He would read the Latin text slowly, perhaps sounding the words out softly under his breath, a practice known as ruminating. Like a cow chewing its cud, he would turn the words over and over in his mind, seeking to extract every drop of spiritual nourishment from them. The library was also the source for the scriptorium. When the abbot decided that the monastery needed a copy of a particular work, perhaps a commentary by Augustine that their library lacked, he would arrange to borrow the book from another abbey. A scribe would then be tasked with making a faithful copy before the original was returned. In this way, knowledge was slowly, painstakingly disseminated across Europe, with monasteries acting as the critical nodes in this intellectual network. The library was the heart that pumped the lifeblood of knowledge through the arteries of the monastic world. Here, in this quiet corner of the abbey, surrounded by the thoughts of saints and scholars bound in leather and wood, the monk could transcend the boundaries of his own time and place. He could listen to the arguments of a Roman philosopher, follow the travels of a desert saint, or contemplate the theological puzzles that had occupied the greatest minds of the Church. The library was the abbey's anchor in history, its connection to a vast, unbroken tradition of faith and learning, a treasure trove far more precious than any collection of gold or jewels.
Fortress of faith, monastic architecture.
We have explored the life within the abbey's walls, the prayers, the labor, the art, the knowledge. We have felt the rhythm of the bells and smelled the scent of old parchment. Now let us take a step back. Let us rise above the cloister garth and view the monastery not as a collection of activities, but as a single monumental entity. Let us consider the very stones that make it all possible. For the architecture of a great abbey was not merely functional. It was a physical manifestation of its theology, a fortress built to protect a way of life, and a sermon rendered in stone and glass. Imagine looking down upon the abbey complex from a nearby hill. It is not a single building, but a sprawling, meticulously organized world unto itself. From this vantage point, its defensive nature is clear. Many abbeys, especially in volatile regions, were fortified. They were surrounded by high, thick stone walls, sometimes with crenellated towers and a strong gatehouse. This was a practical necessity in an age of Viking raids, futile warfare, and general lawlessness. The walls protected the monks, the precious library, the sacred relics, and the abbey's considerable wealth from the violence of the outside world. They created a zone of consecrated peace, a tangible boundary between the sacred and the profane. But the architecture was more than just defensive. It was profoundly symbolic, a model of the heavenly Jerusalem brought down to earth.
The layout was not accidental or haphazard. It was a carefully planned organism, with the church as its heart. Everything was oriented around it. Let us focus first on the church itself, the ecclesia. As we saw with Abbot Shuga's vision, this was the abbey's most magnificent structure. Its sheer scale was a statement of faith. Its spires reached for the heavens, a constant, visible prayer. The building was almost always laid out in the shape of a Latin cross, the primary symbol of the Christian faith. The main entrance was typically on the western facade, so that worshippers and monks would walk eastward towards the rising sun, the symbol of Christ's resurrection.
The journey through the church was a spiritual progression. One would enter through the nave, the long public part of the church. Here, the columns soared upwards like the trees of a primeval forest, drawing the eye and the spirit towards the heavens. Above, in the semi-darkness of the vaulted ceiling, the world outside seemed to fall away. As you moved east, you would come to the transept, the arms of the cross, before finally reaching the choir or chancel. This was the most sacred space, the domain of the monks themselves. Here they would gather for the divine office, their voices filling the resonant space. And at the very eastern end, the culmination of the entire structure, was the apse, which housed the high altar. This was the spiritual focal point, the place of the Eucharist, the point where heaven and earth were believed to meet.
Now, let us move from the church to the space attached to its sunniest side, the cloister. This was the physical and spiritual hub of the monk's daily life. It was a quadrangle, a four-sided covered walkway surrounding an open garden, the barth. The architecture of the cloister was designed to create a world of perfect order and peace. The repetitive rhythm of the arches and columns was calming to the mind, a visual representation of the unchanging rhythm of the monastic day. The open garth in the center was a small paradise, a tamed piece of nature symbolizing the Garden of Eden. Here a fountain might bubble, its sound a soothing presence, or a single tree might grow, a reminder of the tree of life. The cloister was not just a hallway. It was the artery that connected all the vital organs of the monastery. Each of the four walkways gave access to a different aspect of monastic life. The walkway adjoining the church was used for reading and meditation, its stone benches worn smooth by centuries of use. The opposite walkway often led to the refectory, the dining hall, with the lavabo for washing hands conveniently located just outside. Another side would provide access to the chapter house and the dormitory. The fourth might lead to the administrative offices of the cellarer or to the calefactory, the warming room, the one place in the monastery, aside from the kitchen and infirmary, where a fire was kept burning in the winter for the monks to warm their chilled, ink-stained fingers. The chapter house, opening off the eastern walk of the cloister, was a space of singular importance. It was here that the community assembled each morning to hear a chapter of the Rule of St. Benedict read aloud, hence its name. It was the abbey's council chamber. Here, the abbot would address his monks, disputes would be settled, and public confession of faults would be made. It was a space of governance and discipline, often designed with tiered seating so every monk could see and be seen. Above the chapter house, or the warming room, on the second floor, was the dormitory, or dorter. This was a long communal sleeping hall.
In early Benedictine practice, there were no private cells. The monks slept together in one large room, a physical expression of their communal life. Each monk had a simple straw pallet on the floor. A lamp was kept burning all night, as the rule prescribed. Often, a staircase led directly from the dormitory down into the transept of the church, allowing the monks to proceed quickly to their pre-dawn matin service without having to go outside, their transition from sleep to prayer made as seamless as possible.
Spreading out from this central core of church and cloister were the other essential buildings, each with its place in the ordered whole. The infirmary, with its own chapel, garden, and refectory, was a monastery in miniature, designed to care for the sick and elderly monks. The guest houses were positioned near the main gate to welcome travelers and pilgrims without disturbing the enclosure of the monks. The workshops, the bakehouse, the brewery, and the barns were located further out, forming an industrial and agricultural belt. The entire complex was a masterpiece of planning and a testament to a world view. The architecture reinforced the values of the life lived within it: order, stability, community, and a constant focus on God. It was a fortress that protected not just bodies and treasures, but an entire way of being. To walk its stone corridors was to walk through a physical diagram of the well-ordered Christian soul, with prayer at its heart, surrounded by study, labor, and community, all enclosed and protected from the chaos of the world.
The abbey's economy is land, tides, and pilgrims.
We have seen the abbey as a spiritual fortress, a center of learning, and a self-sufficient community. We have marveled at its architecture and explored the inner lives of its monks. But this entire magnificent enterprise, the soaring church, the precious library, the daily provision of bread and ale for hundreds of brothers, rested upon a foundation that was very much of this world, a robust and complex economy. A monastery, for all its spiritual detachment, was also a major economic powerhouse, a landlord, and a business. To understand the abbey, we must now turn our gaze from the cloister to the ledger book, from the sacred to the practical. Let us consider the sources of wealth and influence that allowed this world of prayer and labor to not only survive, but to flourish. The primary source of an abbey's wealth was land. In a feudal society where land equaled power, great abbeys became some of the largest landowners in Europe. How did they acquire such vast territories? It began with the initial endowment. A powerful king or a pious duke, seeking to secure prayers for his soul and the souls of his ancestors, would found an abbey by granting it a large tract of land. This was seen as a holy investment, a gift to God that would pay spiritual dividends for eternity.
But the acquisitions did not stop there. Over generations, smaller nobles and wealthy merchants would donate parcels of land, fields, forests, or even entire villages to the abbey in their wills. They did this for the same reason, to gain the spiritual favor of the monastic community. They believed that the monks, with their constant cycle of prayer, were powerful intercessors with God. A gift of land ensured that the donor's name would be entered into the abbey's necrology, the Book of the Dead, guaranteeing that they would be prayed for by name in perpetuity.
So,
Imagine the abbey not just as the walled complex we have explored, but as the center of a vast web of properties spreading for miles in every direction. The abbey owned farms, vineyards, forests, quarries, and fisheries. It owned the very villages where peasants lived and worked. These peasants were now the abbey's tenants. They worked the land, and in return they paid rent. This rent might be paid in coin, but more often it was paid in kind. A certain number of bushels of wheat, a quota of chickens, or a cask of wine each year. They also owed labor service, being required to work a certain number of days on the domain, the land that the abbey farmed directly for its own use with the help of its lay brothers.
Managing this vast portfolio was a huge administrative task, and it fell to a key monastic official, the cellarer. The cellarer was the abbey's chief financial officer. While the abbot was the spiritual father, the cellarer was the practical master of the house. He was a man of immense responsibility, chosen for his prudence and organizational skill. He oversaw the collection of rents, the management of the granaries and storehouses, and the purchase of anything the abbey could not produce itself, such as salt, iron, or fine cloth for liturgical vestments. He was the monk who had to deal most directly with the outside world, negotiating with merchants, overseeing bailiffs on distant manors, and ensuring the entire economic engine ran smoothly.
A second major source of income was the tithe. The tithe was a biblically mandated tax, a tenth of all agricultural produce owed to the church. As a major ecclesiastical institution, the abbey was often granted the right to collect the tithes from all the parishes within its extensive territory. Every year, peasant farmers would have to set aside every 10th sheaf of wheat, every 10th lamb, every 10th bucket of milk for the abbey. This provided a steady, reliable stream of resources, filling the abbey's enormous barns and cellars and ensuring it would never go hungry.
And then there were the pilgrims. A great abbey often housed a sacred relic, the bone of a saint, a splinter of the true cross, or the tunic of a martyr. These relics were believed to possess miraculous powers. They could heal the sick, forgive sins, and offer protection. As word of a relic's power spread, pilgrims would flock to the abbey from all over Christendom.
Imagine a steady stream of people approaching the abbey gates. They are rich and poor, healthy and sick, coming on foot, on horseback, or in carts. They have traveled for weeks or months, seeking a miracle or a blessing. They enter the great church, their eyes wide with awe. They make their way to the chapel, where the relic is displayed in a magnificent, jewel-encrusted reliquary. Here they pray, and they leave an offering. A poor peasant might leave a single copper coin. A wealthy knight might leave a silver candlestick. A queen might donate a golden necklace. These offerings, accumulated day after day, year after year, became a significant source of cash income for the abbey. The pilgrims also needed places to stay, food to eat, and souvenirs to take home. The abbey might run a guest house that charged for lodging, and stalls near the gate might sell pilgrim badges or small vials of holy water. The influx of pilgrims turned the abbey into a center of commerce, a spiritual magnet that drew a constant flow of worldly wealth. This wealth was, in theory, to be used for the glory of God and the care of the poor. It funded the building of ever grander churches. It paid for the gold leaf and lapis lazuli used in the scriptorium. It allowed the abbey to maintain its hospice, providing food and shelter for travelers, and its almondry, which distributed food and old clothes to the local poor. However, this great wealth could also be a source of tension and temptation. It made the abbey a target for greedy kings and raiding armies. Internally, it could lead to corruption, with the vow of poverty becoming a mere formality as the institution itself became fabulously rich. The cellarer, who controlled the purse strings, could become more of a businessman than a monk. The abbot could begin to live like a great feudal lord with his own retinue and luxurious quarters. The abbey's economic success was essential for its survival, but it was also in constant, dynamic tension with the spiritual ideals of poverty and detachment upon which it was founded. The abbot and the prior, power and politics beyond the walls. We have explored the internal world of the abbey, its spiritual rhythms, its economic engine, and the lives of the monks bound by their vows. But no matter how high its walls or how strict its rule of enclosure, the monastery did not exist in a vacuum. It was a powerful player on the much larger, more complex stage of medieval society. To understand its full role, we must now turn our attention to its leader, the abbot, and see how his influence extended far beyond the cloister into the treacherous and shifting currents of feudal politics. The abbot was the absolute authority within the monastery. His word was law. He was elected for life by the monks, and once chosen, he was to be obeyed as if he were Christ himself, as the rule of Saint Benedict dictates. He was the spiritual father, the chief executive, and the ultimate judge of his community. But his role did not end at the abbey gates. As the head of a vast and wealthy land-owning corporation, the abbot was also a major feudal lord. Imagine the abbot in his private chambers. This is not the simple cell of a common monk. While still less opulent than a duke's palace, it is a space befitting a man of immense stature. He sits not on a simple stool, but on a carved wooden chair. He has his own small chapel, his own staff of servants, and his own clerk to handle his extensive correspondence. Before him are not just theological texts, but maps of the abbey's lands, legal charters bearing the seals of kings, and letters from bishops, nobles, and even the Pope in Rome. As a great lord, the abbot had feudal obligations. When the king went to war, the abbey, like any other major landholder, was often required to provide a quota of armed knights for the royal army. The abbot himself would not ride into battle, but he was responsible for hiring and equipping these soldiers, a significant financial expense. He might be summoned to attend the king's court or the great councils of the realm, his wisdom sought alongside that of the most powerful barons and bishops. His voice carried weight, not just because of his spiritual authority, but because of the vast resources and manpower he controlled. He was a master of law and diplomacy. The abbey was in constant negotiation and, frequently, in legal dispute with its neighbors. A local knight might try to seize a piece of abbey land. A rival bishop might challenge the abbey's right to collect tithes in a certain village. The town that grew up outside the abbey gates might seek a charter of rights, demanding more autonomy from their monastic landlord. The abbot, with his team of educated clerks, had to navigate these complex legal battles, defending the abbey's rights and privileges, which were often enshrined in ancient charters granted by popes and kings. He would travel to distant courts, present his case, and lobby for favorable judgments. He was as much a politician as a priest.
Within the abbey, the abbot's primary deputy was the prior. If the abbot was the king, the prior was his chief minister. He was responsible for the day-to-day discipline and smooth running of the internal life of the monastery, freeing the abbot to focus on the foreign policy and major strategic decisions. The prior ensured the divine office was performed correctly, that the rule of silence was observed, and that the monks carried out their assigned tasks. He was the one who was most present, the constant, visible hand of authority within the cloister.
The relationship between the abbot and the prior was crucial. A strong, trusting partnership could ensure a well-ordered and prosperous house. But the position of prior could also be a source of ambition and conflict. The prior was often seen as the natural successor to the abbot, and this could lead to factions forming within the monastery, with some monks loyal to the aging abbot, and others quietly supporting the ambitious prior. The election of a new abbot upon the death of the old one could be a moment of intense political maneuvering within the community. The abbot's political power was most visible in his relationship with the local population. He was their landlord, their magistrate, and often their only source of social welfare. The abbey ran the local market, milled the local grain in its water mill, for a fee of course, and held its own court to settle disputes among its tenants. If two peasants had a disagreement over a property line, they would not go to the king's court, but to the abbot's court. The abbot's justice was often swifter and sometimes fairer than that of secular lords, but it was absolute.
This immense power could be used for good. An abbot could protect his tenants from the rapacious demands of a king's tax collector. He could ensure a stable food supply in times of famine by opening the abbey's vast granaries. But it could also lead to resentment. The peasants and townspeople might see the abbey not as a spiritual haven, but as a wealthy and demanding landlord, constantly seeking to enforce its rights and maximize its income. Riots and rebellions against monastic landlords were not uncommon in the Middle Ages.
The abbot walked a tightrope. He had to be a man of God, a spiritual guide to his monks, devoted to a life of prayer and humility. At the same time, he had to be a shrewd businessman, a skilled diplomat, and a powerful feudal lord, protecting and advancing his institution's interests in a brutal and competitive world. He was the crucial link between the enclosed, sanctified world of the cloister and the chaotic, power-hungry world outside. His success, both politically and spiritually, determined the fate of the entire community he led.
The infirmary and hospice is a shelter for the sick and travelers.
We have seen the abbey as a center of power, learning, and prayer. But the rule of Saint Benedict called for another, equally vital function. Before all things and above all things, the rule states, care must be taken of the sick, so that they may be served as if they were Christ in person.
This sacred injunction gave rise to two of the Abbey's most compassionate institutions, the infirmary and the hospice. Here, the abstract Christian virtues of charity and mercy took on a tangible, physical form. Let us turn away from the grand politics of the abbot and the high ceremony of the church and walk toward a quieter part of the abbey complex. Tucked away from the main cloister, often with its own small garden and chapel, is the infirmary. This was the monastic hospital, a place of care for monks who were too old or too sick to follow the demanding daily routine. As we enter, the atmosphere is one of hushed quiet and gentle care. The air smells of medicinal herbs, chamomile, lavender, and rosemary, and perhaps the clean scent of fresh linen. The infirmary is often built as a long hall, similar to the dormitory, with beds lining the walls. But here, the beds are softer, with pillows and extra blankets. A fire might be burning in a large central hearth, even outside of winter, providing a constant, gentle warmth. This was a place of relative comfort, a concession to the frailties of the human body.
The monk in charge of this space is the infirmarian. He is chosen for his compassionate nature and his knowledge of healing arts. His skill is based on a mixture of ancient medical texts preserved in the abbey library and practical herbal lore passed down through generations. In a small room adjoining the main hall, he has his workshop. Here, he stores dried herbs in clay jars. He has mortars and pestles for grinding ingredients, and pots for brewing medicinal teas and decoctions.
His patients are his own brothers. An elderly monk, his body stooped and his hands trembling with age, might be sitting in a chair by the window, basking in the sun. He is no longer able to stand for the long hours of the divine office or work in the fields, so he lives here, in the care of the community he served all his life. A younger monk, struck down by a fever or a debilitating ague, lies in his bed. The infirmarian brings him a cup of warm willow bark tea to ease his fever, and speaks to him in soft, reassuring tones.
The diet here is different from the main refectory. The strict prohibition on meat was lifted for the sick and the weak. They were given meat broth, eggs, and other nourishing foods to help them regain their strength. The infirmary often had its own small kitchen to prepare these special meals. It was a self-contained world of care, a monastery in miniature, with its own chapel where the infirm could hear Mass without having to make the long walk to the main church. Here the abbey fulfilled its promise to care for its own, from their solemn vows to their final breath. Adjacent to the infirmary, or perhaps located closer to the main gatehouse, we find the hospice, or guest house. While the infirmary cared for the community within, the hospice extended the abbey's charity to the world outside. Hospitality to strangers was another cornerstone of the Benedictine rule. All guests, it said, were to be welcomed as Christ. The hospice was the medieval equivalent of a traveler's inn and a charity hospital combined. It provided shelter for a wide range of people. There were official visitors, a traveling bishop or a messenger from a neighboring lord, who would be given comfortable private rooms. But the majority of guests were ordinary people on the road, pilgrims on their way to a distant shrine, merchants traveling between towns, and, most importantly, the poor and the destitute who had nowhere else to turn.
Imagine a poor family, displaced by famine or war, arriving at the abbey gates at dusk. They are exhausted, hungry, and have nothing. The almoner, the monk in charge of dispensing charity, would greet them. He would not turn them away. He would lead them to the hospice, a simple but clean building. They would be given a pallet of straw to sleep on, a bowl of the same pottage the monks ate, and a measure of ale. It was a humble offering, but for a family on the brink of starvation, it was life itself.
The hospice was also a place for the sick from the outside world. While the infirmary was for the monks, the abbey often provided basic medical care to the laity as well. A peasant with a badly injured hand, a pilgrim with a festering sore, they could come to the abbey seeking the skill of the infirmarian. The care provided might be simple, but in an age with few doctors, monastic charity was often the only option for the poor.
These two institutions, the infirmary and the hospice, represented the soft, compassionate heart of the abbey. They were a living expression of the works of mercy, to feed the hungry, to give drink to the thirsty, to shelter the homeless, to visit the sick. While the abbot dealt with kings and the librarian guarded ancient wisdom, it was here, in the quiet halls of the infirmary and the humble beds of the hospice, that the abbey's faith found its most direct and human expression, serving Christ by serving those in need.
Heretics, Vikings, and kings pose a threat to the outside world. We have built a picture of the abbey as a place of order, sanctity, and peace. We've seen it as a well-oiled machine of prayer and work, a fortress of faith and charity. But this peace was fragile, an island of tranquility in a sea of constant threat. The high walls that surrounded the abbey were not for show. They were a necessary defense against a world that was often hostile, violent, and unpredictable. Let us now turn our attention to the dangers that lay beyond those walls, the external forces that could shatter the abbey's serene rhythm in an instant.
The threats came from many directions, but perhaps the most terrifying and visceral was the threat from the sea and the rivers, the Vikings. Imagine a clear, peaceful morning. The monks are in the choir, chanting the psalms for lauds. Suddenly, a frantic ringing from the bell tower cuts through the sacred chant. Not the measured toll for prayer, but a wild, desperate alarm. A watchman has spotted the telltale dragon-prowed longships coming up the river.
Panic erupts. The monks know what this means. The Vikings, or Northmen, were pagans. They had no respect for the sanctity of the church. In fact, they saw monasteries as ideal targets, poorly defended, situated near navigable waterways, and filled with treasure. To them, the golden chalices, the jewel-encrusted reliquaries, and the silver candlesticks were not sacred objects, but simply plunder.
There is a desperate scramble to save what can be saved. The most precious illuminated manuscripts are hastily gathered from the library and bundled into sacks. The holiest relics are taken from the altar. Monks try to hide these treasures, perhaps lowering them into a well or burying them in a secret chamber. But there is little time.
The shouts of the raiders are already audible at the gates. The wooden gates splinter under the force of a battering ram. The invaders pour into the sacred precinct, wild figures with beards and axes. For them, this is not a house of God, but a storehouse of wealth. They storm into the church, their shouts echoing in the vaulted space that was built for prayer. They rip the precious metalwork from the altar, smash the stained glass, and set fire to the monastic buildings. The monks, sworn to a life of peace, are defenseless. Some are cut down where they stand, their lives brutally cut short. Others are captured, destined to be sold as slaves in a distant land. A few might manage to escape into the surrounding woods, hiding and watching in horror as their world is consumed by fire and violence. When the raiders finally depart, leaving a trail of death and ruin, the survivors return to a scene of utter devastation. The library is a smoldering ruin. Centuries of knowledge turned to ash. The church is a blackened shell. Lives of prayer and patient labor have been extinguished. The hard physical work of rebuilding, both spiritually and physically, must begin again from nothing. A second, more insidious threat came not from pagan raiders, but from fellow Christians. The greed of kings and secular lords. An abbey's great wealth, as we have seen, made it a tempting target. A king, perpetually short of cash to fund his wars, might look upon the abbey's full granaries and overflowing treasury with a covetous eye. He could impose ruinous taxes, demanding vast sums of money or supplies. He might confiscate abbey lands under some flimsy legal pretext. The most dangerous moment often came during the election of a new abbot. A powerful king or duke might try to interfere, forcing the monks to elect his own candidate. Not a pious monk, but a loyal courtier or a younger son who needed a lucrative position. This abbot would have no interest in the spiritual life of the monastery. He would live as a secular lord, using the abbey's vast revenues to fund a lavish lifestyle, neglecting the buildings and demoralizing the community. The strict discipline would collapse, the rhythm of prayer would falter, and the true purpose of the monastery would be corrupted from within by the very man who was meant to be its guardian. Finally, there was the threat of ideas, the danger of heresy. The monastery saw itself as a guardian of Orthodox Catholic faith. But a new, charismatic preacher might appear in a nearby town, teaching doctrines that challenged the authority of the church. He might preach that the physical world was evil, that the sacraments were pointless, or that the wealthy, land-owning church was a corruption of true Christianity.
These ideas could be dangerously appealing to a peasantry burdened by tithes and rents owed to a rich abbey. The threat of heresy was a spiritual one, but it had very real-world consequences. It could lead to social unrest, to attacks on priests and monastic officials, and to a rejection of the entire social and religious order that the abbey represented. The abbot and his learned monks would have to fight this threat not with swords, but with words. They would preach counter-sermons, write theological treatises condemning the heretical ideas, and participate in inquisitions designed to root out and suppress the ideological contagion. The abbey had to be a fortress not just of stone, but of doctrine, constantly defending what it held to be the one true faith against all who would challenge it.
Vikings, kings, and heretics. These were the forces of chaos that beat against the abbey's walls. They served as a constant, grim reminder that the peaceful, ordered life of the cloister was a precious and hard-won exception in a world fraught with danger, a candle of order that had to be perpetually shielded from the violent winds of the outside world.
The last stroke of the bell is a disintegration and an eternal legacy.
The bells of the abbey have marked our journey. Their rhythm has guided us through the sacred hours of the divine office, the diligent labor in the fields, the silent meals, and the patient creation of beauty. For centuries, this rhythm was the heartbeat of a world, a steady, predictable pulse in an age of chaos. But no earthly institution, no matter how strong its walls or how profound its faith, lasts forever. Now we must listen for the final tolling of the bell, for the story of the abbey's decline, its dissolution, and its enduring, often invisible legacy.
The great age of monasticism, as we have pictured it, could not withstand the profound changes that swept across Europe. The world outside the cloister walls began to transform, and the abbey, once a beacon of progress and stability, started to seem like a relic of a bygone era.
Imagine, first, the slow decay from within. The very success of the monasteries often sowed the seeds of their own decline. Great wealth could lead to complacency and corruption. Abbots, living like princes, might lose touch with the spiritual ideals of their predecessors. The strict discipline of the rule could be relaxed. The vow of poverty could become a legal fiction when the institution itself was fabulously wealthy. The fire of early piety, which drove men to seek God in the wilderness, could cool into a comfortable, routine-bound existence. New, more vigorous religious orders like the Friars, Franciscans, and Dominicans arose, who lived and preached not behind walls, but in the growing towns and cities. And they began to capture the imagination of the laity in a way the enclosed monks no longer could. Then came the cataclysmic events from without. The Black Death in the mid-14th century swept through Europe, devastating monasteries just as it did towns and villages. The plague made no distinction between the pious and the profane. Entire communities were wiped out, leaving only a handful of survivors to chant the office in a vast, empty choir. The loss of life was immense, and the psychological shock was profound. It became difficult to recruit new members, and the abbey's vast lands often lay fallow for lack of workers to farm them. The intellectual world was also changing. The Renaissance saw a renewed interest in classical, pre-Christian antiquity, and a new spirit of humanism that sometimes sat uneasily with the old monastic focus on self-denial and the afterlife. More importantly, universities began to spring up in cities like Paris, Bologna, and Oxford. These new institutions became the vibrant centers of learning and theological debate, taking over the role that the monasteries had held for centuries. The brightest minds were no longer drawn exclusively to the cloister, but to the lecture halls of the university. But the final, decisive blow in many parts of Europe was the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. For reformers like Martin Luther and John Calvin, the monastic system was the embodiment of everything they believed was wrong with the Catholic Church. They saw the veneration of relics as idolatry, the vows of chastity and poverty as unnatural, and the doctrine of earning salvation through works, like the monk's endless cycle of prayer, as a contradiction of salvation through faith alone. They viewed the monasteries as dens of idleness and corruption, vast corporations that drained wealth from the community for no useful purpose.
When a king or prince converted to Protestantism, the fate of the abbeys in his realm was sealed. In England, King Henry VIII, seeking to consolidate his power and seize the church's immense wealth, ordered the dissolution of the monasteries. Royal commissioners were sent out to every abbey. They drew up inventories of their lands and treasures and forced the abbots to surrender their houses to the crown.
Imagine the final scene. The commissioners arrive at the abbey gates with a royal decree. The abbot is powerless to resist. The monks, some of whom have lived within these walls their entire adult lives, are given a small pension and told to leave. They are to cast off their habits and re-enter a world that is completely foreign to them. The last service is held in the great church. The bells toll one final time, not to call the brothers to prayer, but to signal the end of their way of life.
The work of centuries is undone in a matter of days. The precious gold and silver objects from the treasury are melted down for the royal mint. The lead is stripped from the church roof to be made into bullets. The beautiful illuminated manuscripts, once the abbey's greatest pride, are seen as worthless relics of popish superstition. Some are burned, their vibrant colors and golden letters turning to ash. Others are torn apart, their vellum pages used to wrap parcels or reinforce the bindings of other books. The abbey buildings themselves are left to decay or are sold off to local landowners. The magnificent church becomes a source of free building material, its carefully cut stones carted away to build manor houses and farm walls. The refectory becomes a barn, the dormitory a storehouse for hay. The wind and rain howl through the empty arches of the cloister. Ivy creeps over the broken tracery of the great windows. The once thriving heart of a community slowly becomes a picturesque ruin, a silent, melancholy testament to a world that has vanished.
And yet, the legacy did not completely disappear. It flows like an underground river, still nourishing our world today. The patient agricultural work of the monks, their innovations in crop rotation, land drainage, and animal husbandry, laid the foundations for modern European agriculture. The knowledge they so carefully preserved in their libraries, copying the works of ancient Rome and the Church Fathers, formed the bridge across which classical learning passed into the modern era. The universities that replaced them were built upon this very intellectual inheritance.
The abbey's commitment to charity and care for the sick was a distant ancestor of our modern systems of hospitals and social welfare. The very idea of a space ordered for a specific purpose, with zones for work, for study, for living, influenced the development of institutional architecture for centuries to come. And perhaps most profoundly, the quiet rhythm of the abbey,
Its dedication to a life of focused work and contemplation has left a spiritual echo. It remains a powerful symbol of a life lived for something more than material gain or fleeting distraction. The ruins of these great abbeys, scattered across the European landscape, still have the power to quiet the mind and stir the soul. They stand as a final, silent sermon in stone, a reminder of the enduring human quest for peace, for meaning, and for a connection to the eternal. The bells may have fallen silent, but their resonance has never truly faded.